Hey, my name's Ben Johnson. Super excited to be here today at BSides Columbus. Thanks for inviting me to be the keynote speaker. I only wish that I could be there with you all, and I was really looking forward to the after talk conversations, the networking, the maybe happy hours or other things. So unfortunate, but that's the year we have, and 2020 is both forgettable and unforgettable at the same time. But would love to connect with as many of you as I can on LinkedIn, email, follow up call, what have you. And thanks to Mitch and the entire team for all the logistics and planning and everything else. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day today of talks. And if anyone wants these slides or again follow up conversations or something, please reach out. You can get me at Chicago Ben at Obsidian Sec or bjohnson at obsidiansecurity.com. So with that, let's just dive in. I wanted to, I think, present a bunch of information today that's both useful from a high level or more of, if you're kind of slightly more in the business or totally more in the business side of the house, or if you're very technical, hardcore security engineer, hardcore SOC, hardcore incident response. I'm hoping there's material for everyone. And that's kind of the challenge with keynotes, right? It's you kind of want to present to everybody and give some maybe interesting thoughts and philosophies, maybe some technical information, all blended. So hopefully I can do that for you today. So really talking about how you can think about your overall environment, how you can approach security, how you can just hopefully get better. Because let's face it, we're not winning as well as we should be in the cyber war. So with that, who am I? So co-founder, CTO of Obsidian Security. So if any of you ever figure out what a CTO actually does for a living, please let me know. I feel like I put a new hat on every hour of the day, and it could be deep dive into code with the engineers. It could be talking to a reporter or Gartner analyst, security practitioner, um, thinking about strategy, roadmaps, all the other stuff, right? So just a lot that goes on. But the cool thing is I get to think about security with all of that, right? We're thinking about SaaS security, cloud security. Previously, I co-founded and was CTO of Carbon Black, so I had the fortunate opportunity there to see something go from nothing to, it was about 800 people when I left. And I get to think about malware and host-based recording, endpoint recording, EDR, and that kind of thing. So really just how do we think about detection and response? How do we think about suspicious behavior from a device or an endpoint perspective? And now I get to do it more from the user or the kind of SaaS application perspective with Obsidian. And then prior to all that, I started at NSA, spent 7 years from 2000 to 2007 in the intelligence community, working with a bunch of different agencies and Defense Department components and different offices and parts of the DoD, that kind of thing. It was awesome. I would have done it for free, but they paid us, so I guess I won twice, and it was great. And then I got the itch to do something more on the commercial side, which is where Carbon Black spawned from, and now still doing it with Obsidian. But I missed the national security world, so I am fortunate that I got picked to be a technical advisor to the U.S. FISA court. So I get to work with judges and legal advisors and a bunch of interesting people on very interesting cases as a kind of a technical interpreter kind of thing. I also love startups, so I'm involved with multiple startups, probably way more than this in terms of informal discussions and anything I can do to offer advice or opinions or whatever. And fortunate in my Carbon Black and Obsidian roles, I've gotten to speak to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of security teams. Could be best of the best in maybe Silicon Valley, maybe Columbus, maybe New York City, different places that have interesting teams, interesting environments. I've gotten to go all over the world. I'd leave my house for a couple of weeks and go all over Asia trying to sell, product to, I don't know, MSSPs or security teams in like Thailand or whatever. It's kind of different than doing it here, right? But I get to learn a lot. I get to absorb a lot. So having said all that, there's going to be a lot of material in this presentation. So I hope some of it resonates with you. And with that, what's the goal? I typically tend to have a slide or maybe even this exact slide in every presentation I do. And so today's goals It's really just one goal, which is I hope you walk away with a feeling that your time was well spent. But if we break it down a little bit, I want you to have some reflection. I want you to sit here and get some forced reflection time. Now, typically it's a little bit different because you're in a conference or at a summit or something like that. So it's like, hey, shut off the email, forget about all the fires, all the other stuff, get some reflection time. I know it's a little different. You're probably sitting at home, but still, can you get some reflection, forced reflection? And then can you think, can you ponder, can you contemplate? Hopefully some of this stuff leads to that. And then finally, what good is any of that if you don't actually like remember some stuff, right? So hopefully you walk away with some things to remember. And again, if you want to get these slides or have follow-up conversations, would love to have that. So having said all that, I haven't even started and we're already like 6 minutes in. What are the challenges? Now, we have a lot. We have a lot of challenges. And so if we start on the inside first, sort of the internal view, your surface area, what you're defending is exploding, is expanding, especially in 2020, right? I mean, we're already on this cloud migration journey as really a globe, but most organizations, and then the rapid acceleration and adoption of new technology from the work from home, work from anywhere type policies and realities just means like your surface area today looks quite different probably than it did a year ago. Maybe not, but either way, there's more stuff to defend, right? But we're good, right? Like we should be good. Look at all this stuff we're doing. We're doing architecture reviews. We're writing RFPs. We're going to meetings. We're troubleshooting. We're doing help desk. We're doing HR work sometimes. Like, go get me all the events that this person that's being terminated did before they walked out the door. Now, I'm not saying any of that is bad, but what I'm saying is look at all the stuff we're doing, and somewhere in the middle here is like strategy or operations or that kind of thing. So I know we have a lot on our plates as security teams. And then if you go beyond that, there's some challenges, some real challenges. And I've been reusing some of these slides for years, and I think it's still relevant, still accurate, because things just don't get better that fast. And so first and foremost, a skills gap, whether it's a lack of talent in the talent pool, or maybe it's poor recruiting or misalignment between the available skill sets and the requirements, right? Everyone likes to joke that you need 20 years Kubernetes experience or some of these other things that are only a couple years old, and yet you see job descriptions saying you need a lot of years of experience of something that doesn't make sense. Either way, there's a gap. Like I see so many teams that are trying to hire, trying to find people and that kind of thing. And then secondly, this notion of deploy and decay. So over time, our environments, our tooling, our detections are actually getting worse rather than getting better. Like sort of by default, they're moving into decay, so we need to come in and correct those. And then you have attacker successes. So whether it's someone getting into your environment, ransomware, just run-of-the-mill malware, maybe a more sophisticated breach, maybe you just see it on the news, it's tough because you just see like there's a lot of people kind of against you, or at least not with you. And so that's not necessarily a pro, it's more of a con here, right? It's hard. And then there's a ton of data. Like you click a button these days and it transfers a terabyte of data from one part of the country to another part of the country, or even out of the country. So there's a huge amount of data. And what I've seen is this often adds up to a lack of cyber self-esteem, or just sort of like, hey man, like what can we do when the odds are kind of stacked in our against us? And we kind of need that Sesame Street after school special to say, yes, we can do it. We can make positive change or an impact on risk reduction or whatever you want to measure yourselves by. So maybe that's what this talk is the after school special, but we have a lot of challenges, right? And then you start to think about things like cloud and this migration to cloud. And often I hear that, executives or the business side of the house, they don't realize that you all or we all are still responsible for security in the cloud, even if AWS or Microsoft or whomever is responsible for security of the cloud. So just because you outsource maybe more of the IT or compute side of the house doesn't mean you're necessarily getting rid of your security obligations. And then you multiply this now that clouds talk to clouds, apps integrate with apps. And so you might lock down OneDrive and yet someone integrates with Slack and Slack isn't as locked down. And now you have quite of a vulnerable situation or just an opportunity for data leaks and such. So things are moving fast, business is moving fast. That's kind of the whole point. That's what, we want to enable innovation and that kind of thing, but it doesn't necessarily make our lives easier. And then, when we think about what real teams are actually saying, and I'm guessing you all have stories like this, um, these are just quotes that I'm hearing. Like IT is going from 0 to 100 into the cloud and leaving us in the dust, or we're blind to these new accounts, or 50% of our engagements are, now cloud from an IR firm, or you have a whole bunch of accounts and no governance, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot going on, and this is all just internal. I haven't even talked about really the adversaries too much yet, right? So I get it, and hopefully we all are here together to help discuss and share tips and techniques and knowledge and referrals and everything else, because there's a lot that the businesses are doing that isn't necessarily making our lives better. And that's part of the talk today, is how do we maybe kind of influence that a little bit, right? So what would a talk be without, maybe like a threatscape talk, right? And someone somewhere is probably drinking every time you show a slide like this, right? I know those games. But if we think about it, like, breaches are accelerating. And you can see I haven't even necessarily updated the slide in a few years, because it doesn't really need to be updated. There's just a lot. And we've kind of passed the point of no return, where there's enough, kind of adversarial success or nation state attacks or whatever, where we're not really going back. Like, they're having enough success making money or stealing IP or whatever. So this is reality. Like, the internet is now a war zone. So we have to think about that, right? And if you even think about the headlines from last year, there's a lot, right? A lot of stuff going on. We probably have breach fatigue, headline fatigue, pick your kind of buzzword, but we're seeing a lot of stuff, and it's sort of desensitized to it. And recently there was the Twitter breach, and I think Garmin just paid what, 10 million bucks for ransomware, because it basically halted a lot of their operations and such. So this is literally just in the past like month. So there's a lot. And so when we think about who our adversaries are, I wanted to put a slide in like this, because I do think we need to think about who we're up against and what they're after and what's their motive, right? And you can break this up in different ways yourself, or figure out how you want to best do like risk modeling or threat modeling or these other things. But first and foremost, you have to worry that there are people out there that literally don't care who you are. They just want access to maybe your data, maybe your compute, maybe your identity to send out spam as you, or do business email compromise or whatever, but they're just trying to make money. And money, as you know, is quite a motivator, especially when a little bit of cyber attack work maybe makes you more money from that attack than working a legitimate job would in a year, something like that, right? Especially some of these other countries. So you have these opportunistic cyber criminals, and then you have, kind of opportunistic, but a bit more maybe targeted hacktivists who maybe don't agree with you, don't agree with your positions, your stances, your political donations, whatever it is. You have to worry about like people who aren't necessarily there to steal, they're just there more to disrupt, right? So you have to think a little bit more about, hey, this isn't necessarily about just loss of information or data or exploitation of compute. It might be actually, denial of service or degradation of service of whatever you're trying to do, right? Slow you down in terms of productivity or the service you offer. And then you have the nation states, which quite frankly are doing everything. Uh, they're actually even making money sometimes to try to fund military and such, but they're probably more likely after IP or lists of users. Maybe some of their citizens are in your database for whatever reason, and they're trying to figure out some information. So you got to think about that. And finally, insiders. And the reason I put this whole slide together really is because of insiders. The first three: criminals, hacktivists, nation states. What are they trying to become? They're trying to get insider-like access or employee-like access. So maybe you trust everyone. Maybe you vet your employees very well and treat them well, and have very low risk when it comes to a malicious, like, true employee insider. But what can their credentials do? What can their access do? If someone just gets them with the phishing attack or whatever, but then uses that instead of sending spam or whatever, use that to then pivot into other, credentials, find some SSH keys on their box, log into the server, what can they do, right? So you have to look at everyone in your environment, not necessarily as like Joe or Bob or Mary or whomever who's, maybe amazing people, but what can their access, what can their credentials do? And don't feel bad thinking that way, because it's truly like disconnect the human from their access. You got to think about what the insider access can do. But you also have to think about your people and making sure you're not creating a lot of insiders as well. And by the way, insider attacks do seem to be a bit on the rise this year, with lots of layoffs and uncertainty and anxiety of 2020 and all the other stuff that's going on in the global climate. So, please be careful there as well. So we just talked a lot about like the human factor. But when we think about, some of these challenges, one of the things I like to call out is that defenders are often defending infrastructure, but attackers are attacking humans. Like the attacker's trying to get into the CEO's laptop, the CFO's, financial spreadsheets or whatever, but the defender is thinking about IP addresses and subnets and all this other stuff. It's a little bit misaligned. So I think we just got to think about how do we align a little bit better there. And then there's, mistakes, and we just talked a bit about insider threat. And one thing I'll throw out there is a lot of times, like if you can just log in rather than use some, cyber super weapon or 0-day or non-public exploit or whatever it is, you're going to try to go in the access route because you're just logging in. You're not potentially throwing away this, $10 million tool or whatever. So, think about like access and logins, and then, think maybe about 0 days and stuff, because why do this crazy operation if you can just walk through the front door or try password 123 or whatever, right? So we got to think about that. The other thing, and then I promise I'll actually get to more of the meat. This is just setting us up. So hopefully you're still with me. I saw this in a TED talk about health, actually, but I thought this applies so well to security. The absence of, and IT, the absence of disease does not mean health. Like talk to your team, talk to your board, talk to your executives, whomever, business leaders. Just because you're not in the front page of the news does not mean you're healthy, does not mean you have good information security. So you have to think about like that. Step back. Like, are you doing the equivalent of, healthy eating and exercise and, getting your checkups and all the other stuff? Because if you're not, that there's stuff brewing down there. There's tech debt, there's risk, there's holes that are not being patched. So just think about like the absence of disease does not mean health, right? And maybe you can pass that along to your team. So approaching security, how do we, start to take all of this stuff that we need to kind of combat? We mostly just talked about things we need to combat. How do we go about like even trying to tackle this stuff, right? Well, first and foremost, I'm telling you, we can do better. Maybe I'm the Sesame Street special, but we can do better. In some ways, we are doing better. Like things have gotten better, but the adversaries have also advanced too, right? So we're not done. It's not enough. In some ways, it could get worse. This explosion of devices, explosion of data, right? Talking about all the sort of vaccine research and everything in clouds and people trying to hack each other and take out hospitals and stuff. Like, so this is not going away. You all are going to have jobs. And we need to do the best we can, and we need to raise the bar, right? And we can do it. And of all the teams I've talked to, this might even be a higher number now, like 800 companies all over the world. I try to boil it down, and maybe you all have a better way of describing the difference. But to me, it's kind of a simple difference between, do you try to hire a team? Do you try to build a team that is more, I'm going to plug you in with a tool, and you're going to look at reports and alerts and be like an analyst in the sort of pure sense of the word? Or am I going to take my resources, take my technology, take my data feeds, and step back almost like a product manager or service provider, and say, how am I going to build, how am I going to engineer the optimum way to reduce risk, especially information security risk in my environment? And the teams I see that are better, and quite frankly, a lot of times it starts with just having like software engineering skills on the team. But the teams that I've seen do better, and it's not a a 0 or 1 proposition. There's good teams on both, but in general, if I walk into an environment and the mindset is much more of like, how can we build and take the output of this and shove it into this and enrich it with this and tie in this threat feed and this open source intelligence and all this other stuff, that's a better team. Just in general. So if you're not doing that, that's okay, but like maybe you can do more of that. And if you are doing that, again, how can you maybe do more of that? Like how can you stitch together and have that engineering mindset? Now, speaking of mindset, I want us to shift our mindset. I want you to shift your mindset if it's not already shifted. Now, what often happens in security, right, is we're supposed to be, I don't know, maybe the offensive line in football, and the ball is hiked and we drop back and we're just trying to take what's coming at us, right? We, maybe in the actually corporate world, we're a little bit more passive. We just have to react to whatever the business deploys or IT deploys. We think about the environment as if we only have read-only access, and events sort of happen to us, right? That's what I see a lot. But can we shift it? Can we be more aggressive? Like the defensive line, right? And we go after what we want to go after. And you think about the corporate environment, it's like, can we think we actually have a say here? We actually have like a seat at the table to sort of mold or give our opinion and sort of have right access to what's going on. Can we help shape the environment? That's what we need to do. And that's really what this talk is about, is how we think about what can we do in the environment to have an impact. And, I'm a huge book nerd, and my favorite book is Essentialism. And I'll put an actual slide at the end for some book recommendations, but it's Essentialism. It's about making the wisest possible investment of your time and energy in order to have the highest point of contribution. Basically, how do you focus on the vital few versus the trivial many? Often in security, we focus on the trivial many. Oh, I'm just going to get through as many alerts as I can. It's like, oh, did that really make an impact? Or can you like tune it a little, or create something more upstream so you don't need all these alerts? And that one thing would have much more impact than just resolving 20 or 50 or 100 alerts. So anyways, where's the best ROI of our time? I want you to think about that as we keep going, right? And again, I'm throwing a lot at you. There's going to be a lot more stuff. I hope just some of it sticks. Contemplation, forced reflection, right? And you can come back and hopefully review if there's anything of interest here. So what we did as a cybersecurity or information security culture or community is we said we need to slow attackers down. So for the longest time, we focused on blocking or on locking down what could be done, what's capable of being done against these systems. And that's great. We need to keep doing that. So like, what can I block? What can I prevent? You need to have that, right? You don't want to just say, everyone come on in. You need to have some blocking, some locking down, et cetera. You need to slow attackers down. But we all know, or we should know if we don't, blocking is not enough. And so really over the last 10 years, there's been more investment, more resources shifted to detection and response, because you cannot stop 100% of attacks and threats, right? And so we said, you know what? Something somewhere, or the insider or whatever, is going to get through. So we must find things quicker, react, clean up, remediate, etc., faster, more efficiently, more effectively. So we said that, right? And so then we did things like orchestration, which grew into this whole market of like SOAR and automation. But instead of just an alert going to a human, so some of these teams and some of this grew out of corporate security teams that had software engineers. They built tools like Fido at Netflix and some of these others, where you get an alert and you say, okay, what device is this? Is this the CFO or the intern? Do I have any reputational information from my threat feeds? Then all of that data automatically pulled together and correlated goes to a human, right? Then the human has a much better opportunity to make a decision, use critical thought, rationale, etc. And then if they want to take remediation action, you have technology that can block, kill, preserve evidence, reset credentials, etc. But you figure out where's best for a machine to do it, where's best for a human to do it. And I think that was really good, a really, step forward for cybersecurity. And then also, that's not enough to be complete. So then this whole notion of like sort of threat hunting evolved, which is, look, regardless of all of my detection capabilities, I'm not going to detect 100% of the unwanted actions in my environment. Could be a mistake, could be malicious activity, but somewhere there's going to be something that all of my detection rules and tooling do not detect. So that gap between that and the entire, totality of threats and unwanted behavior is the gap that hunting fills. Putting a human mind going, having, a thesis or a hypothesis, going after and seeing, like, is that correct? Is there anything unexpected or interesting? And then if so, is it an actual, compromise or threat? And then tuning detections, hopefully get better and better and better. But threat hunting really evolved. So we did all this stuff really because what we were trying to do, we were trying to speed defenders up, right? So we've done a bunch of stuff beyond blocking. So are we good, right? We're good because we did all that? No, we still have employees, contractors, guests, executives. Like, it's not just about the external attacker, it's also about the insider threat, internal actor, et cetera, right? And mistakes and all that fun stuff that we all live with probably every day. So what else did we start doing? We started discouraging bad behavior. Now, this isn't all exclusive to either speeding up defenders or slowing down attackers or whatever, or discouraging bad behavior. But in this case, it's less focused on the adversary and less focused on our information security team. It's more focused on the entire sort of user population. You start saying, hey, don't click, be paranoid, don't circumvent us, don't install that. So we start forcing training, we start preaching. We all know how well that goes, right? That's the stick, not the carrot. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's absolutely effective, but a lot of times it's not enough and not necessarily sort of acceptable with some of the cultures of the corporate environment and stuff like that, where you don't want to be the person always saying no. And so what we've seen now is this shift of CISOs and security leaders, security engineers, et cetera, to be more collaborative, more constructive. Like, go to the business unit and say, hey, you know what? I'm still accountable for security. I know you're installing this marketing thing, but like, I'm accountable. So like, we need to work together. And so no has become yes, but. Like, yes, you can do this, but here's the review I need to conduct, or here's the controls I need, or the data I need, the logs, et cetera. And what seems to be the case out there, I've seen this and I've heard other CISOs talk about this and such, is that you have to appeal to the heart. Like, you have to make it more of an emotional thing. So yeah, if someone clicks that dumb phishing link, often it's not that they didn't know to click it, it's that they had apathy. They didn't care. They're like, yeah, I'm tired, whatever, I'm going home soon, I'll just click this thing because it might be something. Even though in their mind it's kind of telling them like, this is not right, but they have apathy. So if you can appeal to the heart and get them to care more about like why this is making your coworkers safer and better and the company more resilient, that's when you get some change, right? And so what we're really talking about is encouraging good decisions. You need to get upstream, get earlier into the process, improve the SDLC, the software lifecycle, procurement, et cetera. So you need to be a partner with the rest of your business. So you enable security risk assessments early. Things are easier and cheaper to correct before deployment. I'm probably preaching to the choir here on a lot of this, but I want to call it out. Like, we need to be thinking about this stuff. And so if you start to put these pieces together, what we're really saying is, first, you want to slow attackers down, because if you don't do that, like, it's going to be chaos. Then you want to speed defenders up, make sure you and your team can do the most with the limited amount of time you have. But then it's really it's like you need the National Guard. You need your company helping, and how they do that is through the discouragement of bad behaviors and the encouragement of good behavior or good decisions, right? And so if you flip this around a little bit, it's really slow attackers down, speed defenders up, and in the middle is your user population. And it's really about how can they think about security as like a default piece of the puzzle. Like, how do I have configurations and deployments and that kind of thing be more secure by default? That's really what I mean here. And hopefully you can use something like this, because it's quite easy to explain to the business. It's like, hey, yeah, we're doing this because it's going to slow attackers down, or we're doing this because it's going to speed defenders up, or we're doing this because by default we want a more secure deployment, or more resilient configuration, or access that goes away faster so that you don't leak stuff. There's just it's a good way to think about things, and I think it puts it in a quite simple way of thinking about things. So Um, Thinking about this framework now, hope you're still with me. I am on the West Coast, so start at 6 a.m. Uh, but how do we think about this? Well, first of all, you've got to be able to communicate all this, which is kind of the slide I was just talking about. Like, how do you communicate what you're doing, where you're investing, how you're reducing risk, how you're enabling the business while still keeping it more safe or safer, and that kind of thing, right? So you got to think about communication and that sort of teamwork. But then if we move on to some of those things we just talked about, slowing attackers down. So I think slowing attackers down is often quite easy to wrap your head around if you step back and think about it, right? And again, some of these are quite simplistic, but single sign-on. Can you force all the logins, all the authentications through a choke point, like through a single point? Because then you have a much better place to monitor, to make sure it's configured properly, to see who's logging in, right? Look for anomalies and things like that. So single sign-on. The more single sign-on we see in our world, me from Obsidian, usually the fewer compromises we see. Then if you've forced everyone through a single sign-on point, multi-factor authentication. It's much more obtainable because you're just basically turning it on for one account, the single sign-on account. And then you need to disable legacy authentication or weak authentication because some of these systems do allow for methods to get into mailboxes or other things that bypass the need for something like MFA or single sign-on as well. Like make sure there's not some backdoor accounts into these systems. And then think about things like anti-phishing or some of the common attack vectors. The more you can do there, then you're slowing attackers down, making it harder, raising the bar, right? So create fewer entry points, make it harder to compromise. And then really it's about like limiting other attack vectors and reducing the blast radius, right? Like what could be used once someone's in. And so, OAuth applications scrutiny or sort of third-party applications, we see that a lot too. It's actually becoming quite a hot attack vector because people have gotten better at multi-factor authentication. But if I just send you a link and say, hey, you've been invited to join the brand new like Google Drive app, click here. You click there, it says, hey, do you authorize this to have basically full access to Google Drive? You say, yep. You should probably ask yourself why you need to authorize that if it's already in Google, but whatever, maybe that happens. And then they're in. They don't need to log in as you ever. They don't need to get your MFA. They have the token. Token has, whatever scopes you granted to it, and they can pull data, read documents from your entire domain or whatever. So you got to think about that. And things like PowerShell. Can you just disable PowerShell? I've been saying this for like 6 years. Disable it. Or just say, hey, look, on Sunday night between 11 p.m. and 12 midnight is the only time PowerShell will run. All of our IT jobs will run it then, and then it'll shut it off across the fleet the rest of the 6 days and 23 hours. Can you just do something like that? I know it's easier said than done, but hopefully you're thinking. Hopefully there's thoughts going, right? Like maybe I could at least reduce it to 1 day a week or something. Same with like local admin and stuff like that. Or can you do allow list where only certain things are allowed to run, right? I mean, the iPad is kind of the classic example of an iPhone. Basically, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's pretty hard to get malware into the Apple Store, and then that's really the only thing that can deliver software. So you basically have a trusted software repository, so it's quite hard to get malware onto an iPhone or an iPad, that kind of thing. So how do you slow attackers down? I want you to think about that. How am I slowing attackers down now? So now, slowing attackers down, now let's think about speeding defenders up. Really starts with visibility, right? Because by speeding defenders up, what we really mean is they need access to information to be able to investigate, to be able to triage, hunt, that kind of thing. And so, I think what you've seen is the entire industry shifted away from this sort of method of scanning and sweeps and looking for IOCs or binaries or whatever to continuous recording, whether it's endpoint, cloud, network, other places in the environment. Continuous recording has been become quite common and sort of ubiquitous here. But then can you take it steps further? So can you add threat intelligence or reputation information? So like, yeah, I have a whole bunch of data points or information, but I know some are kind of marked as known bad, maybe I start there. And some are known as marked as known good. Maybe I can ignore that for a bit, maybe ever, and then focus on the middle once I'm done with those. And then maybe prevalence or frequency. Like, hey, if something's kind of known bad, but happens all the time, maybe I'm really screwed or I have bad threat intel. But either way, I have more information. I can make better decisions. And then finally, relationships really help drive this to a better place. Where is this the CEO or the intern that ran SVC host late at night on Christmas? In a strange user context. Maybe I'm jumping out of bed for the CEO. Maybe not for the intern. Maybe still. But I have more information. Is this just PowerShell running from a script, or is this PowerShell running that was spawned from Word, spawned from Outlook? Pretty common attack vector, right? So if you start having these relationships and such, that's where you really start to get power and start to understand what's kind of what's normal and what's not. And one thing that kind of works against us though is our IT environment. So is your IT environment, is your kind of just overall corporate environment more like the left or the right? Are people using gold images, re-imaging and installing clean boxes, have good hygiene? Can everyone use like Spotify and any other app they want, and it clogs up all your logs, all these random processes that are not really trusted or allowed, but it's not really frowned upon in your policy or your culture? And I've sat in the traffic on the left on some of my trips, and I don't know who's sort of breaking the law or who's sort of got right away or whatever. On the right, though, it's quite easy, in a figurative sense. If you see a strange truck or a person or someone going perpendicular, in your environment when everything's going a certain way, it's much easier to spot either from a human or technology and detection rules. So we got to think about that. And another thing I want to bring up is, and I'm a multi-time vendor, so I can say this: push on your vendors. Ask for features, ask for integrations, ask for training. It doesn't mean they're going to give you everything you ask for, but like push on them. Just one simple thing is like, you bought a product a year ago, it's coming up on renewal. Has it advanced in that year? If it hasn't, now maybe there's reasons why you need to keep it or whatever, but if it hasn't, ask your vendor why not. What are they investing in that? How is it getting better? Is it shifting? Your needs are shifting, the environment's shifting, the adversaries are advancing. Your defenses need to be advancing too. So push on your vendors, ask for more, and tell them I told you to do that, and they can yell at me. So do it. So thinking about this, I just talked about a bunch of stuff. We're talking about speeding defenders up. So really what we're talking about is like, you need to give your defenders telemetry, visibility into, what's going on in different parts of the tech stack, the environment. They need access. I've talked to security teams where they have to put in a help desk ticket to get access to O365 logs during an IR, and sometimes it takes a week for IT to give them the logs. This is during an incident response. It's like mind-blowing, but it's reality. So can you make sure you have the right access ahead of time, so when you're investigating, triaging, correlating, doing a full-blown evidence collection and forensics situation, you have the access you need, or at least you've built those relationships and you've communicated why you need access, or hey, I might come to you someday and need this, so please quickly grant it to me. Leverage the hell out of your tools, and push on your vendors. Talked about that. Like, we all have tools. You're not using your tools completely. I guarantee it. There's more value in your tools than you are using today. Get more value out of them. Push on your vendors, and then write code. Pretty much every product out there now has APIs or ways you can like stitch together information, pull information out, shove it into just throw up an Elasticsearch instance if you need to or whatever, but like do some engineering work. And then do retrospectives and things like that where you're sharing lessons that you learned this week. Maybe across companies. Like it doesn't have to be internally. Like, tell another team how you operate it. It's not just about like IP addresses and IOCs when we talk about sharing. It's about like best practices, or I hired someone really great, this is how I did it, or I constructed a really great security program that actually enabled my entire company to become my National Guard. Share that. Give a talk at something like this, talk to each other, whatever, but share that stuff. And then can you tune, that constant deploy and decay, we got to fight it. So are you tuning things, right? So I'm preaching a bit here, but have you added like an updated rule or tuned something this week? Got to do it. Okay, now the other piece I want to talk about, which is like the default security. Can you enlist other people in your organization to attend security boot camps and make it a perk? It's a perfect way to offer like a perk. I'm going to teach you how to secure your home router and your kids' Gmail address and make sure when they play, Minecraft online or whatever, they're not going to bad YouTube sites or whatever, right? We're not talking earth-shattering education here, but we're talking good concepts that help reinforce corporate security concepts that you want them to learn. So can you do stuff like that? And of course, teach them about internal things, targeting, what might be going on with your environment, that kind of thing, but get them involved. And, I was talking to a really awesome team in one of the best, most well-known brands in the world. And they said the best thing they've done is they roll in DevOps person, and then basically they're a full-time security person for, could be a couple weeks, could be even a couple months, and then they roll them back. Now they have a much better understanding of how security works, how to better deploy their own stuff in a secure way, or a way that helps speed up defenders or again slow down attackers. And they're just more of an ambassador. You've built those relationships, that kind of thing. So can you do stuff like that where you roll in an engineer or someone from kind of the other side of IT into security for a bit and then roll them back out, right? Immersion, that's going to be a great way to do it. Another thing is access. How often do we give someone access and then that's it? I gave you access, and by default, access never goes away. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about drive default security. Can you flip it? So by default, if you do nothing else, eventually access goes away. It itself has a decay, right? It itself has a half-life, and it starts to go away, right? Because what we typically set ourselves up for is we have to go out of our way to be better at security rather than having the default path forward just make us more secure, right? So can you counter this like identity creep or everyone just having too much access, too much surface area they don't really need? So can access have a half-life? You see stuff like Slack is pretty good when you add a guest. You can right away add a end date, and then you can extend it. But that means I had to go out of my way to explicitly extend their access. Otherwise, if I do nothing, if I go on vacation for 3 months, their access goes away. I'm in a more secure place, at least in theory. So thinking about that. And then when you think about like other aspects of security in the business, can you establish sort of pre-procurement review? I know people sign up for SaaS quite quickly and quite often. Can you establish a pre-procurement review? Can you create an access review process? Can you have sponsorship internally for guests and contractors, right? Like how many times have you looked at an account, especially if it's like a contractor or guest, and you have no idea who the internal employee at your company was that asked for them to join? Yeah, maybe there's a ticket in some other system somewhere or whatever, but like it's hard to track that down or keep track of it, right? Can you do that? And then, things like single sign-on that we already talked about, but like, can each new system just interact or just integrate with your single sign-on system? So by default, okay, at least I'm going to see people like logging in because I'm looking at Okta or Microsoft or whatever, so I can see this new tool and at least see who's logging in, who's using it. And then things like we all share files all the time, right? All over the place. Do they have a password? Can you default them to having an expiration date? So by default, all those files that people are sharing, eventually you can't access them and you don't have to worry about those links leaking out or stuff like that. And then things like mail forwarding, just shut it off. Why the hell do people need mail forwarding? Shut it off, right? So sorry to get aggressive there, but some things you can do to hopefully just make your systems more secure by default, right? That's more on the SaaS side of the house. And then the infrastructure as a service side of the house, default to just no public shares, networks, buckets. Like, can you just like lock everything down more by default, and someone has to explicitly open it up, right? Because in the past it was more explicitly open or more implicitly open, and you had to explicitly close it down. Centralized access to something like Amazon, right? Like for us, you have to go through G Suite, your G Suite account, and impersonate a role and that kind of thing. You have certain groups and stuff. So no one should be actually logging in directly through AWS. They should be logging in through our IDP and into their accounts and things like that. Can you automate scans, static or dynamic scans, if you're building software, so that by default at least there's more checking before it ever hits production? And then educate on that shared responsibility model we talked about, where you are still responsible for security. Okay, I hope you're still with me. It's been about 45 minutes. Let's wrap up here. So it's all about people. I said a whole bunch of stuff. I hope you go back and look at it. I hope you've taken something with you so far. But really what we need is aggression. We need leaders. We need aggression. We can influence the battlefield we play in, right? That we have to monitor. It's all people problems. You got to go build those relationships with other parts of the business, with the board. You know, all progress is people, all problems are people. At least that's what I like to say. So how can you go get more buy-in from business leaders, or how can you work more with IT? How can you influence the mindset of your whole company? So really what I'm talking about when I say drive default security is make it so people have to go out of their way to be insecure. Don't make it where they have to go out of their way to do the right thing. Make it where they have to go out of their way to do the wrong thing. Because if they just go forward, they do the right thing. And really what we're talking about here is culture, right? Culture eats strategy for breakfast, famous quote by Drucker, but you know, it's true. Like, just build an environment where people are excited. We give out, you know, military challenge coins when people report a security or privacy issue. I've seen people give out stormtrooper helmets or gift cards, or, you know, just all sorts of other things. Create that culture where people are excited to defend the business, right? Because we are on different teams, but we have the same mission. I was fortunate, the guy in the bottom right, James Weatherby, an astronaut, to be at a couple events where he spoke, and I got to spend time with him. And he talked about how he would go and meet all these people working on the space shuttle and such, and really understand the motivations and stuff, but also make sure they understood that he was a person, that they weren't just building something to a schematic, that they were actually shoving humans into this rocket and sending it into space, and just creating that sort of emotional connection and that communication. So, you know, you might need to do the same thing. Like, hey man, I'm not trying to say no. I need your help, right? We need to work together. Excuse me. And then there's lots out there, right? There's a lot of different tools out there. Can you use some of these tools, blend them with maybe the commercial tools you already have, and, you know, build a better environment? And like, give you an example, I have credit cards. Why are credit cards on there? I've seen teams buy some cheap prepaid credit cards and just sprinkle the credit card numbers throughout their environment in little text files. And if there's ever a charge on it, boom, someone is doing something wrong. And it probably cost them $1,000 total to buy like 10 $100 cards. So, like, can you think about these interesting things of how would I detect? How would I, you know, again, slow attackers down, speed defenders up, drive default security? And you're probably sick of seeing slides like this. Maybe you're sick of giving a slide like this, because often we say the attacker only has to be successful once, but you're like a soccer goalie who has to stop 100% of the, you know, penalty kicks or whatever. But I guess a lot of what we're saying too is, once they land, the minute they land in your environment, it flips. They should have to be 100% perfect. Now, I know that's a little bit of a dream, but how close to that can you get? Like, as soon as their behavior looks a little bit suspicious, or they hit the wrong box or whatever, they're caught. So remember, slow attackers down, speed defenders or yourselves up, and then how can you drive default security through your environment, right? Discourage bad behavior, enable good decisions. So think about that. I hope this helps. And the final slide, and then I'll take questions, is my book recommendations. I have tons. Happy to recommend all sorts of books. Tell me the topic. I'll probably have a book, because again, huge book nerd. But Essentialism: How do you focus on the vital few versus the trivial many? Extreme Ownership is basically like, we can always do more ourselves. So have those retrospectives, but like, how could you have better communicated or prepped or whatever? And then Team of Teams. You know, we're always working in environments where there's teams of teams. And McChrystal talks about fighting Al-Qaeda in Iraq as the commander of Joint Special Operations Command. So you had these amazing special forces actually losing to Al-Qaeda in Iraq until they made some changes, and a lot of it just dealt with information flow, horizontal information flow, getting people the information much more quickly, less bureaucratic. That kind of thing, but all phenomenal reads, and I highly recommend them. So with that, I will stop and take questions, but I thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope we can connect after this through email or a Zoom call or on LinkedIn or something like that. So thank you very much.